Hi, greetings all, and welcome to the second session of Kearney's High-Tech webinar series. In the first session, we focused on the resilience of global semiconductor ecosystem, and in today's session, we'll focus on artificial intelligence. I'm John Gomes, and I lead Kearney's software practice. And on a personal level, I'm very passionate about and intrigued by artificial intelligence. I focused on AI as a part of my engineering during AI's winter years, and then worked on AI at a leading high-tech firm before Kearney. High-tech was accelerating before the onset of COVID-19, but it has been in the hyperdrive as a result of massive disruptions caused by the pandemic. As never before, high-tech is defining features of geopolitical competition, prospects for economic growth and recovery, continued political and social shifts, the flow of data, information, and analyses, and how business itself evolves in the post-pandemic period. With the end of the pandemic in sight, and with all the profound questions about shape and outlook of the post-COVID economy, all eyes will be on what's next for high-tech. To discuss the evolving role of technology industry, Kearney has launched a no-holds-barred virtual series of conversations on the future of technology, brought to you by Kearney's 30-year-old think tank, the Global Business Policy Council, and our technology experts. Today, we'll be discussing artificial intelligence's strategic and tactical importance with our distinguished speaker, General John R. Allen. But before we start, let me introduce you to Erik Peterson of Kearney, who leads our Global Business Policy Council. Erik came to Kearney in 2010 from the Center for Strategic and International Studies, where he was a senior vice president and held the CSIS William Schreier Chair in Global Analyses. Before joining CSIS, Erik was the director of research at Kissinger Associates. Erik is a sought-after analyst and speaker on global foresight and trends. He has lectured widely in 50-plus countries and groups diverse as the World Economic Forum and TED. Under Erik's leadership for the past 5 years running, the council has been recognized as one of the best for-profit think tanks in the world. With that, let me hand over to you, Erik.
Thank you for joining us in this conversation. As I was mentioning, we have nearly 300 people from 37 countries across the world representing multiple industries. Sincerest welcome to all of you. The structure for today's session is straightforward. We'll kick off the conversation with a few questions, fireside chat style, after which we'll open things up to addressing your comments and your questions, your reactions. I'd like to bring your attention to the Q&A function at the bottom right hand of your side of your screen. Please use it. Your participation is more than welcome. We're counting on it. 2 additional housekeeping points. First, I'd like to remind you that this session is being recorded. And second, a very talented artist from the Ink Factory in Chicago, Ariana, is with us to create live visual notes of our discussion here today. She will be synthesizing our words into images and text to visually represent key concepts and themes, and we'll have a chance to see the benefit of her work at the end of the session. Now, it is my sincerest privilege to introduce our featured guest and speaker. He brings to the table an unrivaled background in public policy, military service, the think tank world, and deep expertise in topics ranging from geopolitics to high technology. John Rutherford Allen assumed the presidency of the Brookings Institution in November 2017, having most recently served as chair of security and strategy and a distinguished fellow in the foreign policy program at Brookings. He is a retired U.S. Marine Corps 4-star general and former commander of the NATO International Security Assistance Force and U.S. forces in Afghanistan. During his highly distinguished 4-decade-long military career, he served in a variety of command and staff positions in the Marine Corps and the Joint Force. He commanded nearly 150,000 U.S. and NATO forces in Afghanistan from 2011 to 2013, and in Iraq, he served as deputy commander of the multinational force West during the intense combat operations you will remember in the Western District of the Al-Anbar province in 2007. And ladies and gentlemen, if that wasn't enough, he's also served in 2 senior diplomatic roles following his retirement from the Marine Corps. First, for 15 months as senior advisor to the Secretary of Defense on Middle East security, during which he led the security dialogue for the Israel-Palestinian peace process. President Barack Obama then appointed John as special presidential envoy to the Global Coalition to Counter ISIL, a position that he held for 15 months. John has too many affiliations, awards, and distinctions for me to mention here, but I'd really like to highlight a couple that are, at least from my perspective, very close to home. I'm very proud to say that he was the Marine Corps Fellow at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, and also a Senior Fellow at the Merrill Center of the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies, as well as Senior Fellow of the Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory. And from the standpoint of Kearney, we've been extremely proud to have General Allen with us at the Kearney Global Business Policy Council that our council puts on each year. We conduct around the world, and I wish to extend my very sincerest thanks to him for joining us today in this webinar. So, soldier, scholar, diplomat, expert in the evolving role of high technology in our lives. John is the co-author of the book, and I'm showing it here, The Turning Point, Policymaking in the Era of Artificial Intelligence, alongside co-author Darrell West, published by Brookings. And I understand that he has a book coming out imminently entitled Future War in the Defense of Europe, to be published by Oxford University Press. So warm welcome to you, John. And if we could kick off here with a few questions before we go forward with public issues, I would be grateful. But first, I wanted to give you a warmest welcome to today's session.
Eric, thank you very much. At first, it's wonderful to see you again. It is great to be associated with Kearney again. I go back a number of years with the organization, and I have always enjoyed every affiliation that I've had with Kearney. And certainly I remember my days very fondly at CSIS as a young Marine officer. Let me get just serious for a brief second and say that my deepest condolences go out this morning to the shooting victims in Atlanta and to the shooting victims in Colorado, in Boulder, and also to express my solidarity with our Asian American citizens, but also our Asian visitors as well. This is a dark moment in the context of these mass shootings, and my prayers are with the families and the victims and the wounded. So, Eric, thank you again for the invitation this morning, and it's a great pleasure to be with you and to be with Kearney.
Well, thank you, and thank you so much for being with us, John. On that important comment with respect to recent developments, and especially the Asia connection, we thought it might be interesting to kick off this thinking that we're doing thanks to your insight on relations between the U.S. and China, which of course were on display during the meetings recently between high-level delegations between the countries. And earlier this month, the National Security Commission on Artificial Intelligence warned that, and I quote, China possesses the might, talent, and ambition to surpass the U.S. as the world's leader in AI in the next decade if current trends do not change. It would be great to have your insight and perspective on that notion, John.
Well, thank you for that question. That commission, National Security Commission on Artificial Intelligence, as you know, was led by a couple of extraordinarily important individuals in the context of AI. I have to tell you that I absolutely agree with that conclusion. In fact, if you go into the study, and I would recommend it to everyone, The Commission also says that should these trends continue, we may well find ourselves at a moment of great strategic vulnerability. So let me just unpack that a little bit. China, since has been obviously evolving its technological capabilities for a number of years. And in the aftermath of the 19th Party Congress, we saw a public commitment by the leadership of China in a number of very important areas. One is obviously to develop its indigenized capabilities with respect to high technology. But another very explicit statement by the Chinese leadership was that it would ultimately seek to surpass the United States in technology and artificial intelligence. Now, when you establish those as national goals, and then you have the resources at hand in China, which is not an insignificant amount of foreign reserve, and a very powerful economy that can be dedicated to that objective, plus a reservoir of great human talent, but also in a way that in the West we don't see at all, which is in essence a consistent leadership. Now that Xi Jinping has largely established himself as, for however long it will occur, the leader of China, and has accumulated unto himself enormous authority. We've not seen it since Mao Zedong. So we have a continuity of leadership, and I don't for a second propose that that's something we would want to emulate in the West. We just don't see it. We see an enormity of resources. We see the human talent that is growing, but we also see that the nation has set itself on a road and a trajectory to surpass the United States. And I used to use the term the West when I would hear those kinds of ambitions being espoused. And the West, to me, has become an exclusive term, not an inclusive term. And it doesn't adequately address the challenges that we're going to face in the 21st century, because in reality, these kinds of technologies, artificial intelligence, one of them, these technologies in many respects will be the platform upon which our geopolitical relationships will ultimately be determined. And so when you hear the term the West and you line it up against a future technological trajectory, what it takes off the table immediately is what I think is extraordinarily important that we have to consider going forward vis-a-vis the Chinese, which is the enormity of the strength of the technologically gifted economies and societies in East Asia as well. So we have South Korea, we have Japan, we have Taiwan, we have Singapore, we have Australia. Very importantly, we have India, which is a vibrant democracy, technologically advanced. So when we talk about the potential for China to surpass the United States, I think we limit ourselves in just permitting that to be the sole nature of that question. The truth is, it's difficult for any one state ultimately to compete with China. And I think as we see ourselves going forward, as we read the recent guidance issued by President Biden out of the White House, which is the interim guidance on national security strategy, we see that there's an intent by the United States to lead in the world on issues associated with aggregating our technological capabilities, to compete, to set the conditions in a values-based system to compete. So if we talk about the pure surpassing of the United States by China, yes, that's something that we should be very concerned about. And I believe that, again, in that guidance, President Biden has been very clear that it is the intent of the United States not just to lead globally on this matter, but also to lead domestically on the matter of these evolving technologies. And so it's an important question. I think that the clarion call that comes forward from that commission is very important for us to listen to. And as we shape our future in the 21st century, as we shape our relationship with China, I think it has to account for relationships in a multilateral way with the other advanced democracies, technologically sophisticated democracies, values-based democracies that give us the capacity to do good with our technology, but also, if necessary, to compete against an authoritarian state, potentially using that technology to gain the upper hand.
Great. And I know that, General Allen, that you were engaged in a series of two-track dialogues, zooming in here on artificial intelligence and the Sino-American relationship, looking at AI-enabled military systems, and that you had conversations with counterparts at Tsinghua University. What were your top takeaways from that set of discussions, and what are the key issues that we need to be thinking about, do you think?
Well, let me come back to the previous point, because it's germane here as well. I think one of the important dimensions, in particular, of artificial intelligence is that it is still, while it has become pervasive, it is still a relatively nascent technology. The full potential of artificial intelligence, I think, has yet to be realized. And even our most visionary computer scientists, mathematicians, and scientists writ large, I think, have difficulty fully envisaging where this can all take us in the future. Where we have found ourselves with previous technologies like this, and why it's so important for us to think in a multilateral way about this, is that at this moment, it's very important for us to have a comprehensive conversation among the technologically advanced countries, China, of course, as well, on issues associated with standards, issues associated with regulatory considerations. Because at risk here, of course, is privacy and data protection, and how these technologies will ultimately relate to our respective societies. So when I talk about the leadership of the United States, but I also believe that there is a groundswell of thirst globally for U.S. leadership and a cooperative work amongst the democracies. Sometimes you'll hear them referred to as the D10 or the T10, Technology 10, or T12. I think there's a thirst for that, and at the heart of that is our values defining the way ahead on standards and behavioral directions. Now, so that's in context, the basis that we had for our bilateral conversation with the Chinese, which was actually quite productive. What we found was that we had probably some pretty significant intersection of views, commonality of views on the application of artificial intelligence as it relates to the military. So, for example, we were very conscious of the application of artificial intelligence into military systems right now. It requires more time. It's going to require more sophistication for these systems to be as reliable, the algorithms to be properly trained and to be as reliable as we would like them to be. We also see that there will be escalating risks if we're not careful between the United States and China as we apply artificial intelligence potentially to our military capabilities. So we'll need to have conversations there with respect to what data systems should be off limits to each other's countries with respect to the potential for tampering or intrusion, because the outcome of that data in training artificially intelligent systems might be unimaginable in the context of military consequences. We also talked about proliferation risks, as we have seen in the past, where weapons systems have great humanitarian challenges to them. How do we and China, how does the United States and China ultimately address the potential for uncontrolled proliferation? There will be other countries that can apply artificial intelligence. We've seen that in other places. And can the United States and China agree on the ways to limit the potential for the proliferation of artificial intelligence that can be used in a negative or a destructive manner? And then finally, we talked about the humanitarian risks associated with the application of artificial intelligence as it relates to military applications. And And here we come to an issue where we probably need to have a lot more conversation with the Chinese. But from my perspective and the comments that I made, we're very clear in the United States, and I think I can speak for our allies, and by and large the democracies, we're pretty clear on the application of force with respect to the weapon systems that we use. And what has emerged, Eric, is a conversation on the potential for artificial intelligence to be applied to lethal autonomous weapon systems. In other words, systems that are released into the battle space that have no human control. And that's a term of art. Where is the human control in these weapon systems? And while we may see artificial intelligence being employed for preventive maintenance, for example, or just maintenance more broadly, or supply discipline, artificial intelligence applied to intelligence collection and processing, artificial intelligence that might be helpful for decision assistance or decision support. Once you cross the threshold into artificial intelligence powering weapon systems that are autonomous, then we and the Chinese need more conversation. Our own view is that we will be governed, and I laid this out very clearly, we will be governed by the law of armed conflict, which is that as we in the West and we in the larger community of democracies, which are governed by the rule of law and a commitment to human rights, as we apply military force, first, there must be a necessity for that force. You just don't randomly apply force in the battle space. Second, that the individual commander, or in this case, if we're thinking about an artificially intelligent system, is there a capacity to discriminate between valid legal targets and those that should not be attacked, people and infrastructure that should not be attacked? They're innocent civilians. And third, the application of force in the context of proportionality. Now, it's going to be a long time before an artificially intelligent system that is responsibly released into the battle space can do all those things. And so for now, in the West, we are extraordinarily conscious to this issue. And so you'll hear us talk about where is the human in the loop. Sorry to go on so long, but this is an important topic. Where is the human control of artificially intelligent weapon systems? It is a matter of priority for us in the United States. It's a matter of priority for our allies. It certainly is for NATO. And I think I can speak for our allies in East Asia. It's a matter of priority for us because we, in the end, are democracies that are ruled, that submit to the rule of law, and we're committed to human rights. But I will simply tell you that as we go forward in this century, as states, authoritarian states, totalitarian states, illiberal states, states that have slipped away from democracy, as they become technologically more advanced, there may well be the potential that they would apply artificial intelligence to completely autonomous weapon systems. This is now the time for us to have the conversation with the other great AI power on the planet on how we should be thinking about this and how we may want to effect controls and limitations on those systems, because the consequences of an AI lethal autonomous system sparking something much bigger because it was operating outside human control is frankly, given the potential consequences between conflict of the United States and China, it's unimaginable. We've got to get a hold of this now. We still can. And this is the point that we make all the time with our conversations with the Chinese.
Let me build on those valuable comments, John, by asking about how this conversation can evolve in the future. We were talking prior to launching this formal conversation about the reports that a number of private sector financial groups, including payments companies, have proposed the use of the G7 as a channel to take on AI and some of the other kind of big questions that emerge on the economic side, in addition to all the remarkably complex and important military issues that you've just highlighted. How can we? I think we can agree that the channels need to be substantially more muscular in the future. And so then the operative question becomes, what group or combinations shall we consider as we move forward? How do you look at all this?
Well, I have to some extent offered a preliminary view today with you, Eric, but I think the G7 is a platform for this conversation. Given the sizes of those economies, given the sophistication of their technological basis, I think the G7 could be the basis for this conversation going forward. But I do believe that, as I've said already this morning, I've got a piece that's going to be coming out on this relatively soon. I really believe that we, as a community of democracies, need to have a conversation about how, given our shared values, given our shared commitment to human rights and the rule of law, given our shared commitment in the end that technology should do good. Our commitment is to technology doing good. Given that, I think that there is room in the world for a conversation among those states to set the standards and norms so this technology can do good. And we should invite those states that potentially may have different systems of government, potentially different systems, different economic systems. We should invite them to the table. We ought to get our act together first, because for now, we don't all share the same approaches with respect to artificial intelligence. And we're talking about AI today, but as I think this community would certainly know, we are on the edge of something big with respect to quantum computing. We seldom address it in fora like this, but biotechnology, where the Chinese have enormous capacity. Biotechnology is taking off as well. Also robotics and smart robotics. You know, all of these technologies together have created an environment which have geopolitical implications. They have individual state and bilateral, multilateral implications. And I really believe it's time, and I believe the U.S. is in a position now to lead, where we need to have a conversation, a global conversation among the like-minded states on what the spectrum of technologies looks like as it is evolving in the 21st century, and how can we ultimately ensure that our policy and regulatory and behavioral expectations with respect to these technologies can in fact be harnessed now, so in fact that they do what we want them to, and they are factors for good going forward. And as I said, I could list the states, but the EU, of course, North America, India has got to play in this. It's hugely sophisticated in that regard. And of course, the East Asian states. But if you've got all of them at the table, the percentage of the global GDP that they would represent in and of themselves is enormous, but they are also highly sophisticated technologically as well. And we may have different views on privacy. We may have different views on data security. We may have different views slightly on human rights and the rule of law, but by and large, I think we share values that gives us the capacity to speak with a very large and vibrant voice on these matters.
Yeah, that's such a critical point on shared values, such a critical point. And it predicts the next question that I had lined up for you. We've been watching this whole notion of how AI continues to be developed in order to address bias and to ensure that kind of ethical conduct and transparency that you've emphasized. As you look forward, what are the major opportunities and hurdles in terms of moving this along? You've just suggested that there are asymmetries between different frameworks, but this important shared value set of common denominators should certainly help guide us. How do you see us moving from here to there?
Well, again, it will come from diplomacy. It will come from a collective set of national commitments to want to bring these technologies to the table in a manner with common standards and common behaviors that give us the capacity more broadly as a community of nations to employ these technologies for good. You know, if we ever needed a good reason to do this, we're living in it right now. I'm looking at you in a Zoom screen or some kind of a flat screen where I would much rather be with you personally, as I was a couple of years ago with this great community that you have participating with you. I'd much rather be with you personally. But look, we've all been driven into a digital world. And if we don't like where we are, having the capacity to harness our technologies for medical surveillance, for vaccine development, for the kinds of therapeutics that will be necessary to heal us if we're sick, and vaccines to keep us well from the next pandemic, which I think is almost certainly on the horizon given the changes in the climate, et cetera. Here is the perfect and the important opportunity for us to have the kinds of global commitment for the aggregation of these technologies for good. So I think that this is a real opportunity for us in many respects to take advantage of this moment. Climate is another opportunity for us to aggregate our technological capabilities, not just in predictive analytics, but also in the context of genetic engineering for crops that can be sustained on ground that is suffering from the onslaught of climatological change, et cetera. And what is the world going to look like 20 years from now, 30 years from now? How can we begin using advanced predictive analytics and quantum computing conceivably to begin to help us to understand what the world will look like? And that kind of a technological advance, globally harnessed and ultimately globally applied, has enormous capacity for good.
John, you mentioned the whole issue of biotechnology, and we've obviously been thinking about that a great deal with the development of vaccines during this whole COVID-19 period. And we're getting a number of questions here, wondering about your perspectives on the outlook for healthcare and how AI can kind of push us both in the right and possibly the wrong direction with respect to healthcare issues. Would you like to weigh on that a little bit?
At the risk of commenting on something that could get me eye deep in another series of questions, I will give it a shot. A couple of things. We said that the physicians and the scientists will probably make us healthy again. But I think it will be the data scientists and the computer scientists that will set the conditions ultimately for us to preserve that health. If it had not been for artificial intelligence being employed by some of the big pharma companies, if it had not been for artificial intelligence being applied in some other areas with respect to drug development and so on, I don't think that we would have the hope that we now have, given the vaccines that are coming online. The United States has 3 very effective vaccines, a potential 4th coming online. We have moved the vaccination of the American population, successfully moved that date well forward. And I think the United States needs to now very seriously think about how, given the capacity for our production, how we go about now becoming the source for vaccines globally, in particular in the global South. But I do believe that the whole issue of healthcare can be revolutionized by artificial intelligence, which can aid in scientific research, in particular on biotechnological developments. The two are symbiotic in many respects, and we should be, and I'm sure we are, we're looking for the many ways where artificial intelligence can accelerate, which is often what artificial intelligence in the end does. It gives you a clear view of the questions you never had before, you never could imagine before, but it also gives you the capacity to accelerate research and development in ways that we could not have imagined. And so I think that there is a very clear role for artificial intelligence in biotechnology in helping us ultimately to get well and to stay well. And that's a very simplified comment, but I do believe that there's great value and great roles for that technology going forward.
On that point, more generally, we've been tracking your writing on this, obviously, and way back in 2018, which seems like a century ago in technology terms, you wrote that increasing penetration of AI into so many aspects of our lives is affecting decision making and improving efficiency and having kind of broader organizational return. Would you like to amplify on that a little bit? I think that was that in effect was prescient in light of what we've seen after you wrote those words.
Yeah, I don't think there's any question. And look, I will not append to myself or attach to myself the term visionary. I leave that for others to call themselves that. But, you know, we have seen technologies emerging in the past where there were individuals who were capable of seeing those technologies and imagining where they could go. And we've seen that in a number of technological and scientific areas. From my perspective, as we have seen artificial intelligence become more widely available in the private sector and find greater application in the various sectors of our lives across the human experiment, I think that the future is quite positive for us. I'm careful about being too blurry-eyed on this matter. I'm very careful about about making predictions which could be foiled. But I do believe that in the end, these kinds of technologies are a reflection, their application, are a reflection of the values of the states and of the community in the private sector that applies them. And if we do, in fact, as a community of nations, if we do believe at the core of who we are as a people, if we do believe that these technologies have great potential, whether it's in education or in healthcare, we just talked about that, or in autonomous systems that can improve transportation or make our cities smarter, make our children smarter, completely changing the schooling experience from one of teaching to one of intense learning. If all of these can make us better as a people, and we apply our values in protecting our people from the potential dilatory effects of these, then there is a potential for artificial intelligence to completely revolutionize the human experience. And we talk about a revolution in military affairs often. It's become a bit trite. I do believe that the military dimension can be very darkly revolutionized by the role of artificial intelligence. But on the flip side of the same coin, if we apply values and we commit ourselves to creation of standards and the regulatory processes that protect the people while we continue to push the research and development on these technologies, I think that the good that they can do to our societies and to our people is really unimaginable right now. And we should push for that. We should stand for that. And we shouldn't stand ultimately for the nefarious use of technologies. And it's very interesting, actually. If you go into the recent President Biden document, the interim guidance, he commits that the United States in our ultimate national security strategy will address fundamentally the issue of the United States and emerging and advancing technologies. And there was an interesting turn of a phrase. It talks about technology in the context of the potential for peril or promise. Now, I found that interesting because we could have flipped that over and talked about the United States in a leadership role trying to exploit the potential promise of these technologies while we limit the potential peril. But I found it interesting that the formulation of that phrase put the potential for peril, and we got to be attentive to that. The NSCIA was very clear on that matter. We've got to put the potential for peril uppermost in our thinking while we're seeking to apply these technologies in a manner that provide the promise to our people that they deserve.
Thank you for that. We've had a number of questions come in, including one from one of our members in Europe that are focused on what the private sector can and should be doing. No surprise there. And the one particular question is, how do companies do no harm, we've all heard that expression, and achieve equitable outcomes? And in other words, what are the potential risks that AI, that companies should be addressing? We've already talked about a number of these, but how do we look at that role between public and private sector? I think that you highlighted a little bit in your beginning comments. Would you like to amplify a little more what you think on that?
Sure. And I'm always reluctant to tell another country what they ought to be doing. But since they asked, I'll offer my views. I think that there is a very important role to be played, in particular to the heart of this question, on issues associated with doing no harm. Where we have seen, at least in the American tech sector, but it I think broadly carries over certainly into Europe and in other areas as well, East Asia, that many of our private sector companies have led the way on standards of ethics. In fact, you'll hear the acronym ELSI frequently used in the private sector, and I absolutely applaud it. ELSI stands for what are the ethical implications of our research and development on artificial intelligence in this regard? What are the legal implications, the regulatory, the behavioral, the legislative implications? And then the S, E-L-S, little I being implications. What are the societal implications of this technology? And the private sector, in many respects, in the United States, and I think in Europe, and in other areas as well, East Asia and in India, where the private sector has been at its best, it has led that conversation on the ethical, the legal, and the societal implications of not just artificial intelligence, but other emerging technologies. Now, when that is coupled with the vibrant democracies, as I said a number of times already, for which the rule of law and human rights and privacy are important, then as we step into the depths of this century, as we step into the emerging potential of these technologies, if we can step off from that common vision of how the ethical, legal, and societal implications of these technologies can impact our population and commit ourselves in the public and the private space to protecting our population, then I believe we have a very bright future with respect to the promise of these technologies. But if we're out of sync, if we're not synchronized on this, or if there is less than full commitment to these areas, then we may well find a dissonance between the public and the private sector that's going to have to be hammered out, or a dissonance between certain states that will have to be hammered out. And I think, again, with the Biden administration, which is committed to multilateralism and has committed itself ultimately to global leadership, not global hegemony, but global leadership, in particular on issues associated with technology, I think that there is a real opportunity here for us to work with the EU, which has done tremendous work on privacy and data protection. And I think we've all been in awe in many respects of what the EU and Europe has done in that regard. I think there's great opportunity now for us to cooperate to continue the process of building standards that will set us well in the future as these technologies continue to evolve, and they will continue to evolve.
John, you've loaded up a number of very important concepts that back up the title of your book, your most recent book. We have the new one coming out, of course, but your most recent book, Turning Point. And as you think now about this series of simultaneous inflections, many of which you've touched on here, how do you see things kind of moving? What are the key kind of broader priorities that we should be assigning? I know that you've already pinpointed a number of these, but from a commanding heights approach, where do you see things moving?
Well, I'm obviously very concerned about the relationship between the United States and China going forward. In the world I come from right now at Brookings, we call the U.S.-China relationship the consequential relationship of the 21st century. We call the U.S.-India relationship, by the way, the indispensable relationship of the 21st century. We call the U.S. transatlantic relationship the essential relationship of the 21st century. And I think that we will find going forward that these technologies are going to define in many ways the geopolitical and geostrategic relationships going forward between the great powers. And, we use a term I used it before I came to Brookings, but we call it the 4 C's, the letter C, in defining the potential for our future relationship with China. And the first C is, where it's possible, find a mechanism for cooperation. with the Chinese, because they are out there. Climate, pandemic, global health. There are many opportunities for us to find ways where we can find a way forward. And we've had a number of these bilateral conversations with the Chinese that I have led, and I have found that the conversations can be quite rich. The second C is that we should be prepared, however, just by virtue of our two countries and what we do on the planet's surface, we should be prepared to compete. And there is in competition opportunity. And that competition can improve the lives of our respective citizens, but it can also take on at the upper end of competition the next C, which is confrontation. Now, the previous administration tended to deal with the Chinese primarily from that particular C, and a constant spectrum of confrontation, which I believe did not flow from a comprehensive U.S.-China strategy. It seems sporadic and ad hoc frequently. I think we will see a much more comprehensive strategy with regard to China going forward, which will seek cooperation. It will expect competition. It will confront, if necessary, in order to protect our interests and those of our allies. Very importantly, we've got to be very careful about the fourth C. And the fourth C is conflict. And any occasion where two powers the size of the United States and China, both very heavily armed with thermonuclear weapon systems, with at least one side having very sophisticated cyber attack capabilities, frankly, we do as well, we've got to be very, very careful that we manage confrontation in a way that doesn't inadvertently spill over, because we have hotspots that can trigger conflict very quickly. But if we think about our relationship with China, and more broadly the community of democracies with China in the context of the four Cs, I think that there's a roadmap to go forward there. And so that's how I see us going forward. My one fear in all of this is that we will see, through decoupling strategies, that we may well experience a bifurcation of technology, where the Chinese ultimately go their own way. They seek an indigenization. Microchips is a perfect example. An indigenization of their capabilities that creates a bifurcated system of technology. We would have the potential for American-led technology. I think the EU might consider it taking a third way, and we'd have a Chinese system of technologies. No one's interests are served, I believe, by that. And we should be very careful about decoupling strategies that ultimately create a bifurcation that can accelerate the geostrategic rivalries and competition with the potential for worse over time.
John, it's precisely this kind of commanding heights vision that we were hoping that you would share with us, and you've done that admirably. As we expected, you've given us a tour de force. And please accept our sincerest appreciation for all of your valuable insights here. And now I've been asked, we're going to shift over now. I don't know how anyone, no matter how talented, Ariana, could be capable of capturing the essence of all these good points in a quick visual. But I've been asked to shift over now to Ariana, who will be sharing her work with us. And for all of you with us on the call, we'll be sending a PDF of this out to you at some later point. But could we do that transition now quickly with sincerest thanks again to General Allen. So
good heaven.
Here we are. Oh my goodness. So technologies are reflection. I see evolution, broad capacity. John, she even got your 4 C's on the lower left-hand side. The whole notion of continuity and consistency and leadership was captured above that. The whole US-China, oh my goodness. Ariana, you did a great job on this. We see a number of issues on standards. I would add values in here somewhere. I think that was a key point raised by the general during his define our values. Now I see it in the middle with the heart. but that could be a little more prominent. Really, congratulations. You did a fantastic job capturing this. Yeah, I didn't think it was possible, John. All right, well, with that and with the promise that we'll send this along to you, ladies and gentlemen, it now falls on me to thank the General once again and to ask you to stay tuned for details on future segments of this important series of conversations. We expect that we will be devoting our next session on the whole issue of cybersecurity, which obviously has loomed large for many of us over recent weeks, months, and years. So with that, I'd like to bring this webinar to a close. Thank you all across the world for being with us. And on behalf of the partners of Kearney, we send you our very best wishes from the entire Kearney community. So thank you and looking forward to seeing